Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Great. My colleague David Brown, the TfN Chief Executive, I thought did a really good job this morning of setting out the strategy of the organisation in 15 minutes. So he's not left me that much to do. What I'm going to try and do, though, is give a perspective on the wider purpose that we're here to serve. But in saying that David's done an excellent job, he's done an excellent job for the last 2 years, and as was mentioned by one of the questioners, he, in September, will be moving on into a leading transport role in the private sector. So it gives me an opportunity, and there'll be more of them between now and September, to thank David for everything he's done in getting the Northern Powerhouse transport work off to such a fantastic start. Why don't we give him a round of applause? All I've got to do now is find somebody else equally good. He mentioned our vision. And just to remind you what he said this morning, our vision in Transport for the North is of a thriving north of England where transport connections drive economic growth and support excellent quality of life. Another way of looking at that is why are northern citizens, of whom there are 16 million of us, £5,000 per head poorer than southern citizens, even if you exclude the City of London from the south? It's not a particularly easy question to answer. It could just be a fact of life that the closer you are to the capital, the more dynamic the economy will be, and we've just got to lump the fact we're £5,000 per head every year poorer. Or it could be because we've never quite marshalled the unique assets of the North in the way that the South has to bridge that productivity and gross value added per capita gap. I wanted to answer that question at the beginning of the Transport for the North journey. And David referred to the Independent Economic Review of the North, which I know many of you are aware of. But it took a transport authority to get that moving because we wanted to make sure we understood what the economic opportunity was. And it answered my key question. That 5,000 per head gap is because we haven't sufficiently built on our competitive strengths. There was a great slide that David showed with our prime capabilities flashing like on a radar screen all over the North. These are not things that just Manchester's good at or Sunderland's good at. These are strengths which are everywhere in the North. And the fact that they're everywhere in the North, but they're underperforming their potential, suggests that transport connectivity could play a role in more effectively linking them up. What are those unique northern strengths? No great surprise that the first is advanced manufacturing. No great surprise, actually, that the second is low-carbon energy. The third and the fourth that came out of the research were a bit more counterintuitive. The third was digital. Now, Mancunians will know you could go for a walk around here this afternoon in the old warehouses and you'll find lots of digital SME startup businesses. It's up here. It's in most northern cities. It's not just in the Old Street roundabout in London or in Silicon Fen. But the fact that that is one of the four big strengths of the North is a great sign of encouragement and hope, because that's a future and future-proofed industry. And the fourth, health innovation. That has something to do with the clusters of companies, large and small, surrounding the great teaching hospitals in the North, building new businesses on life sciences. Those four prime capabilities are really interesting because they're internationally tradable. So there are things we can make more wealth for the north of England from trading around the world if we punch above our weight. And they're probably worth, with the indirect supply chain and value chain and knock-on jobs, about a third of the jobs in the north of England. So they tend to have a bias towards advanced employment, but that doesn't mean it's just a niche market. It's the vital component of making the North buzz. It's not a sufficient economic strategy, of course, because that still means that 2/3 of employees in the north are in other key roles in the economy, what you might call the consumer-facing high street economy, like this hotel, like the gyms and the clubs and the bars and the restaurants and the shops that we all use. And they need to be linked with the strategy as well. 97 billion of extra gross value added to the northern economy. That's adding a quarter to where we are today. And 850,000 jobs ahead of business as usual. That's the economic prize. Will we ever get there? Well, that's a big ask. It requires the leaders of the North, entrepreneurial and elected, to move to a different growth trajectory, to have a higher level of ambition, which will put even more, but perhaps more importantly, different demands on our transport system. But it's an exciting opportunity. And that's why we're committed to make sure that transport connectivity empowers and liberates that entrepreneurial activity and those high-quality job opportunities, rather than, as so often at the moment, actually acts as a barrier or a brake. When we did that independent economic review, we wanted to answer the question, if there was an opportunity to grow the north of England faster in the way that Jesse Norman described, what were the levers we needed to pull that would help us to do it? How do you get from business as usual growth trajectory to dynamic, ambitious growth trajectory? Well, a whole range of levers, like there always are in life. You need to do lots and lots of different things better and better coordinated. But that's a cop-out answer. There are 2 levers that really make a difference. And the first ain't transport. Sorry, guys and gals. The first is something else. The first is education. I also sit on the board of Ofsted, the schools inspector, and I'm the lead NED for the Northwest. If you look at schools in the northwest of England in the state sector, they are underperforming schools in the state sector in the south of England. And that is not inevitable. Same analysis. There's nothing inevitable about that underperformance. Because actually one of the things we're doing quite well here in the northwest is primary education. Primary education in the north is not, on average, lagging the south, but secondary education definitely is. So there's something we're not getting right when kids transition into the latter years of education that southern schools are by and large getting right. Something about ambition, it's something about aspiration, it's something about teachers, it's something about having the best teachers in all schools, it's something about the organisation of education. Without getting political, there are fewer multi-academy trusts up here than there would be in the south of England because they're employer-sponsored and there were more sponsors down south. But unless we tackle the underperformance of northern state secondary schools, we will not get on that growth trajectory. But on its own, that educational improvement will not be enough because it will not allow people who had a better education than their brothers and sisters and have higher ambitions than their brothers and sisters to do something different or bolder to get to the parts of the country where they need to get. Some of you may have heard me say before, my wife comes from Salford. So I spent the last 35 years in part with my in-laws in Salford. Many of her friends from that school group 35 years ago never left Salford. Coming to Manchester was quite a big thing, actually, because you had to cross the Irwell. Now, thanks to the metro, you can get from Salford Quays to Manchester Piccadilly really quickly and really effectively. But if you've had a fantastic teacher at a really good academy school in Salford, and you've got the ambition to do the sort of job that your parents would never have dreamt of, can you really do a daily commute to Leeds? Or if you're the same sort of kid in Bradford and you want to do a digital job in Manchester, can you get from Bradford to Leeds to Manchester on a daily basis? We're talking about distances pretty much the length of the Central Line on the London Tube, but the answer today is it's not an easy commute. So the first part of getting on the growth trajectory is tackling education, and the second part is enabling citizens of the North to commute on a daily basis to the higher quality job opportunities that that strategy opens up. So there are two conclusions I'd draw from that. This isn't a transport project that I've been asked to lead with David. Transport, as he said, is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And secondly, improvements in transport connectivity that we're working on, that you'll hear more from in a few minutes from my good colleague Jonathan Spruce, have to be taken forward integral with other major public policy levers, and most particularly with education. I've mentioned workers, citizens, colleagues, friends, neighbours, having the opportunity to earn more for their family by moving to higher quality jobs. But that growth trajectory is as much about entrepreneurs and potential entrepreneurs having the ambition to do things that haven't been done in the past, hitting new markets, taking goods, services, and people to new markets, and having the transport connectivity to make that happen. And I think that is hugely important in a post-Brexit world. Post-Brexit world, we need to achieve two things. We need to include the people who have been left out, and we need to find a new growth model to deliver their living standards. Whichever way you look at that, it means more trade with the rest of the world, of course, including Europe. So international connectivity is vital, and that's something else Transport for the North is spending an awful lot of time on. And international connectivity starts on the ground. If an entrepreneur can get their goods or products or services to an airport and to a seaport seamlessly, they're much more likely to take the jump of trading with a market in Latin America or the new growth areas of Asia. If an international airline can see that people can get to a northern airport, that airline is much more likely to take the punt at establishing a new route. If we invest, as we are doing, thanks to the private sector, in our northern seaports, international shipping lines are much more likely to think whether a call at a northern port makes sense on an itinerary, perhaps on the way to Rotterdam. International connectivity starts on the ground. Our ambitions to improve transport for the North are all about doubling the catchment areas, doubling the number of people, the number of businesses who can get to international entrepots, airports and seaports within a 90-minute journey. Currently, 4.8 million people can get to Manchester Airport by public transport within 90 minutes. Our ambition is to double that to more than 10 million. By January, as David said, we should be the first regional statutory transport body in England, covering 16 million people, with the right to be the client side of a relationship with Highways England, with Network Rail, with HS2, specifying the North's needs and making the case for investment, so that those organisations have a one-stop shop to go to. What's needed in the North, how is their taxpayers' money to be spent, and the Secretary of State has a one-stop shop for Northern advice. Jonathan will go through this in more detail. We clearly have the Northern Powerhouse Rail proposal, a coast-to-coast railway, some upgrade, some new, to put the lintel on the top of High Speed 2. We're looking at new road networks, both at the strategic level to relieve pressure on the M62, but also at the A road level, sometimes the missing link in the pan-northern network. We're looking at smart, ticketless, fair price guarantee travel for northerners who start with a bus, go on a metro, go on a train or two, including intercity. We're looking at that international connectivity. And in all those ways, our objective is to do two things: to make a difference to northern citizens in the short term, for example, with the retirement of Pacer trains, and to make a difference to northern citizens in the long term. What's different from what went before? What's different from what went before is that the board members that David described, from the elected leaders through the LEC chairs who sit on my board come to those meetings to look at the North through a One North lens, to look at the needs of the North as a whole, and maybe to go back to their constituents after a board meeting and sell back to them, the people who vote for them, that they have actually voted for an investment a priority in another part of the North because it, on that day, gave greater gain to the North as a whole. It's a fantastically exciting project, and it should add up to making the North even more thriving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. In terms of the Northern Powerhouse and the aims and objectives that were set out in the Independent Economic Review a year ago, we've obviously had 12 months since. How do you think we're getting on?
So Jonathan will take us through some work that we're currently involved in on development corridors. When you see the maps on development corridors, you see something that is drawn from the Independent Economic Review. So there's an L-shaped development corridor that starts in Cumbria and ends up in Sheffield. Traditional transport planning wouldn't necessarily have prioritised that as a route. It's based on the common economic currency of Sheffield and North Lancashire and Cumbria, especially, but not exclusively, in advanced manufacturing and nuclear. That's just one example of how the landscape is changing. I think we are making transport planning even more economically future-proofed.
And with your education hat on, you mentioned being on the board of Ofsted and education being arguably more important than transport in closing that productivity gap. Is there a similar education for the North group that is helping to rally around that?
No, there isn't an education for the North. In fact, there isn't anything else for the North. I don't want to overstate that point. Clearly, there's the N8, which is a group of, you know, of the Northern Research Universities. There are other organisations that have been established. But when I say there isn't anything else like transport for the North, there isn't anything else that has statutory basis, large staffing, and significant budget. So it's not that I'm an empire builder, it's that we are doing some of these other things because at the moment there isn't anybody else to do them. Should there be an education for the North? That's an interesting question. I think local authorities would say it's a very local issue. It's a city issue. Schools in Salford are different from schools in Manchester, are different from schools in Liverpool. That's what they would say. As long as somebody's doing it, I don't mind. What I do mind is not enough of it's happening at the moment. Chris Grayling said to me when he became Secretary of State, John, it's great to have these long-term plans, but passengers in the North need to see that things are getting better. He meant journeys were better. People could sit down on the train ran on time. I'm saying that's important, Chris, but so is the fact that you're able to go to a higher quality job. That's also making life for a passenger better.
Okay. Anybody want to put a question to the chair? Yeah, one in the centre there, microphone behind you.
Hello, John. My name is Michael Hall from Lexington Communications here in Manchester. It's as a northerner and someone who's lived there all my life, it's great to hear you talk passionately about the North and the potential of transport to the North. Now, when it comes to transport investments, London gets 6 times the amount spent than the person in the North West. How ambitious is transport for the North going to be in terms of going to government and saying, we want the same levels of money that London gets, we want the same investment London gets? Is that something you're looking at? Is it going to be based on a formula based from government, or are you going to go with them based with a shopping list and say, they get this, we want that? Thanks, John.
Northern Powerhouse Rail is a project of the size and significance of Crossrail 2. We're currently in the middle with our Highways England colleagues of a feasibility study of a Trans-Pennine Road tunnel. Putting a road underneath the Pennines Peak District is a massive project, a multi-billion project. I think we have to do something because there's only one motorway east-west between the Midlands and Scotland, and it's called the M62, and it needs some resilience. So these projects will require a scale of investment that the North has not seen from our national delivery partners. And that is of the order, it's about time the North had its own Crossrail and equivalent on roads. But I don't think it can be done by a formula. I really don't think it can be done by a formula. I know you were talking this morning about cost-benefit analysis and returns on transport investment. We are now painting on a bigger canvas. We're looking at the real economic prize, not just the narrow passenger or journey time prize. But even so, we absolutely have to make a strong case for the investment. And I think going to government and saying it's now our turn isn't the answer. Going to government and saying we need this because we can justify this because of the difference it can make is the answer.